Nearly half of teachers in England are planning to quit within the next 5 years due to a surge in workload, constant monitoring and paperwork, according to a poll. The issues have been caused partly by on-off COVID school closures and other pandemic bureaucracy. The poll, commissioned by the National Education Union, I think some would probably see that as a left-leaning union, who lobbied for schools to stay shut for longer. It claimed, the union, the poll, I should say, claimed that 44% of teachers plan to leave the profession by 2027. Joining me now is Katharine Birbalsingh, the head teacher, school founder and education reformer. Katharine Birbalsingh, welcome to you. These polls, I wonder if teachers are any worse than any other profession for saying they're disillusioned, it's not worked out how they hoped it would do and they plan to quit. Or are teachers particularly bad at saying they will quit, but then actually not doing so?
No, I think and it's not just since COVID, this has always been the case with teaching, that a number of people join the profession and then leave. And they leave predominantly for two big reasons: workload and behavior issues. And the two are really tied to each other. Obviously, if you spend a lot of time chasing behavior issues, you're not able to spend time planning your lessons and other things that you would prefer to be doing.
I know we've talked before and you've written extensively, and the proof is in the pudding at the Michaela Academy, that the discipline aspect of it, it's when certainly teachers that I talk to, you work with them, you live and breathe it, that very often that's the thing that really, even the most wide-eyed idealists are undermined by the friction on corridors and in classrooms with difficult pupils.
Yes. Well, when years ago when I was teaching, all the time, and now I'm a head teacher, I would always leave an hour after school every day so I could get on the phone and ring parents, either to say good things or bad things about the children. But it was necessary to do that in order to help the behavior in my lessons, because if I rang home and said good things, that meant the next day if I ran home and said something bad, the parent would be on side with me. But it was something I had to spend a lot of time investing in. And teachers spend a lot of time writing up behavior incidents, chasing up over detentions, children aren't showing up and so on. And unfortunately, for instance, I get a lot of stick for expecting good discipline and having high standards for behavior. At school, everything's wonderful. I mean, outside of school, through the media and so on, people sort of take a dim view. And actually, it's by having strict behavior systems that head teachers and senior teams can support their teachers, which will then bring down their workload, you see. So in the end, having a more free-for-all, actually, I would argue, drives teachers out of the profession.
That's interesting, because when you listen to teaching unions, they say, OK, the paperwork, the organisation outside of lessons, the exams, the workload has increased and increased and increased, and the school holidays don't mean anything anymore. But actually what you're saying is that, yes, that may be part of the answer there, but actually ill discipline creates its own workload and bureaucracy, and that all takes time too.
Yeah, you have to record it. You have to write up the incidents. You might have to then meet with the parent. There's huge amounts of work increases because of behavior. And actually, if the unions are reporting this as a problem, that teachers want to leave because of workload, the unions can also sometimes say the behavior isn't a problem in our schools. They're often kind of out there saying behavior is just fine. And when they do that, I often think they're undermining their teacher members, because behavior is not fine for all teachers. And it shouldn't be like that. School leaders like me need to be held to account. We need to have systems in our schools that better support our teachers so that the discipline isn't the main thing that they're doing all the time. Also, if you have a school as a school leader where the behavior is excellent because you've got such high standards and it just works, it means my mind is freed up to think about how can I reduce the workload for teachers in other ways, because it won't just be behavior that increases their workload. It's also teaching requires a huge amount of work. It is a very demanding profession. And people like me in positions of leadership need to be able to think about how to reduce things for teachers. But if all I'm doing is running around with the daily behavior incidents that can happen in some schools, then I don't have the headspace to think about that.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's, it's a really difficult one to measure, but I just wonder whether disillusionment amongst teachers is growing. I mean, it's a function of all professions, isn't it? People go into accountancy or nursing or whatever it is and find it's not quite what they thought it would be when they're in their late teens or their early 20s, and actually they find the appeals of becoming an estate agent grow more attractive, whatever it is. Has it got worse? Is there a sense in which perhaps it's held up to some utopian idealistic standard? The reality is so different from what they expect that more numbers are not making it all the way through?
I'm not sure it's the expectations necessarily, but I don't think people realize just how bad behavior can be. And when you go into teaching, you want to have impact on the children you're teaching. You spend ages preparing a lovely lesson for them. You want them to enjoy it and to learn something. But if the behavior is poor, and at the end, the children haven't learned very much, you feel rather useless as a teacher. And in order for any of us to enjoy our jobs, you need to feel like you have purpose. You need to see the impact that you are having on a daily basis on the children. Behavior can undermine that feeling of purpose and that feeling of impact. And so, I'd say my teachers work hard, but they see the impact, the positive impact on the children every single day. So they're happy to put in all that hard work because they're seeing the difference they're making to the children's lives. If you don't see that, and as I say, behavior can be a huge part of that, then you feel like, well, what's the point? Why am I kidding myself when in the end the children are not learning what I want them to learn?
Katharine, I was going to ask you a question about I'm completely on board with what you're talking about in relation to discipline, but is there a kind of broader trend here with, even when there's not a problem, there being a kind of idea of teaching baked in, that teachers need to go beyond what you've just said, teaching kids what they need to learn in terms of content and knowledge, but playing a much more social, pastoral role in children's life, which, in generations gone past, maybe they didn't. I only worked as a school office administrator for a number of years, but it gave me an insight into all the extra stuff teachers have to do. So getting involved in family life, thinking about children's well-being, not in a kind of normal way, but in this sort of like almost another curriculum sort of way. And is as well as the thing you've highlighted with the instances of bad behaviour that might happen here and there, is there a kind of baked in problem with teachers' role expanding almost to teacher, social worker, life's problem solver?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say the bad behavior incidents are here and there. I'd say that they're a lot more common than we like to admit as a society. But I think this has been for some time. So, I've been in this business for over 20 years. It has always been the case that teachers are also social workers, are also supporting families. Like I say, I used to ring home families. I'd leave an hour at the end of the day, just put aside that hour just so I could make calls. And that was, 20 years ago. The fact is that this has always happened. I say always. In my lifetime. And I think that's okay. I think that teachers accept that as long as they're seeing impact. And I think that impact is reduced the more behavior issues you have. Like, it doesn't mean that there are constant fights, but if there's constant low-level disruption in your class where children aren't listening and the teacher's having to say, silence everyone looking at me, and there's exasperation, and you're thinking, gosh, I've planned this whole lesson and the time is just flying away and I'm not really teaching them very much. And then they're failing their tests at the end of the week or at the end of the month. And you're thinking, why am I doing this? It's that lack of purpose. And that's important for anyone to feel fulfilled at the end of the day. Why do you go into teaching? Because you love your subject, because you love children, because you want to build relationships with them and you want to teach them. And if you find that you're not really teaching them, partly because of the behavior, partly because of the teaching methods that you might have been instructed to use by some of the teacher training institutions, by the culture that we've got, which is very progressive, where we feel the children should lead the learning as opposed to the teacher being the authority in the class and leading the learning from the front. All of this undermines the teacher's sense of authority and the respect the children will have for the teacher. And so sometimes teachers can undermine themselves without even realizing, because I'd say because they're more progressive than they are traditional. And then the children don't necessarily listen, and then they can get frustrated. And in the end, they think, why am I doing this job? Why am I? Because teaching is hard. It's really challenging. It's exhausting. It's physically demanding. It's intellectually demanding. You're having to spin loads of plates all at the same time. And to do it well, I tell you, it takes a lot. But my teachers, they love putting that time in because they see the impact. And I keep coming back to that, which is that if you don't see much impact, you don't see purpose in your life. And that will be, in the end, the reason why you're leaving, because you're thinking, all I do is fill out paperwork for these behavior incidents. Why am I bothering? What I wanted to do was teach, and I'm not able to teach.
Katharine, you always make it sound so simple. I mean, I know it's not, but you seem to have found a way to make it work, and an example that it feels like many other schools ought to be following. Katharine Birbalsingh, as ever, really appreciate your time, and thanks ever so much for what you're doing in that sector.